Hey guys, and welcome. It was a slow week in the shop, but I did work on one custom order, and I'm going to tell you about that before we talk about my unhealthy obsession with patterns. A few weeks ago, a client reached out about one of my adult proportioned dolls, and they requested a 60-inch doll in bright white lycra fabric. I tried to talk him out of it. I didn't want to sew curves on Lycra, and I didn't think it would look great when it was done, when it was all stuffed. So all I could think about was how bad it was going to look. But they insisted, and so I sewed one up and I sent it off. And then I didn't hear from them for a while. Then I noticed that the client had left me a nice review on the item, and they sent me a picture of the doll when it was stuffed. It looked like a child's drawing. I honestly was really embarrassed. But they did request another one, and this time in 48 inches. And they also asked that the limbs be a little bit more proportional than the 60-inch. And I was sure that the proportions of this doll were being thrown off because of the stretch in the fabric. And I'm not sure why I had such a negative reaction, but immediately told them that I wouldn't do any more sewing in Lycra for that doll, and that I had been really disappointed with the results. And I didn't hear back from them right away because I answered their email in the evening. And I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking about the picture of this doll and how disappointed I was that it looked that way. And so, out of the scraps that I had on hand, I made a 48-inch doll and a 60-inch doll and stuffed them so that I could give them a good critique on their proportions. And in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder, maybe they wanted it to look that way. I mean, they couldn't think this looked good.
I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking about that doll. So I put together a 60-inch doll and stuffed them. It's the first time I've ever stuffed this size. And yeah, I would agree that the proportions are a little off if you want it to look like an actual human being. Definitely the head needs to be sized. The belly, this area right here, I'm not very happy with. I need to widen the shoulders to make it look better. And the legs are a little bit long, especially the crotchal region here. That needs to be, so this needs to be less, and this needs to be more. So I wrote it all down. This is how I do it with my patterns. I have my hand-drawn pattern in here. It's actually drawn on wrapping paper because I don't have paper big enough. And then on the front, when I find issues with the pattern, then I write it down with the date, and then when I fix it, I'll write the date that it was resolved. But I need to widen the thighs and reduce the crotch, widen the shoulders, enlarge the head, and reduce the feet and hands because I'm not happy with how big the hands and feet are.
And after those two dolls were sewn up and stuffed and critiqued, I did hear back from the client who did indeed want the dolls to look like that. And it suddenly clicked for me. They were going for a look, and I got it. They wanted it to stretch, and that makes sense because they sent me a video of how they were using it. So I will make them another one. Just this time, it's going to have extra hardware on it to make their vision a possibility. And even though I initially cringed when I made this doll, now I think it's a pretty cool idea, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with it. And this is one of the many reasons why I love custom orders.
I think it would be fair to say that I have an addiction to patterns. They're all in these containers, and almost all of them are vintage. I do have them somewhat organized. They are labeled. So I've got babies and children, dresses, men's and unisex, women's, costumes, and crafts and dolls. And they are a variety of patterns. Some of them are just vintage ones that I really like. These are from the 70s and 80s. And sometimes I get them because they're nostalgic. Like this one, I wore this dress when I was 10 years old. And my mom made it for me. So let's take a look at the different types of patterns there are and how they've changed over time. Almost all of my patterns come from the thrift store, and there's lots of different varieties of them out there. Most of my patterns are between 1965 and 1990. But there's lots of different kinds here. So this is one kind that I find at the thrift store where somebody has cut the pattern and they just put it in a manila envelope with the sizes on the back and the picture of the pattern on the front. And there was a time in the 1980s when people did this a lot. I usually don't buy patterns if they're cut, but this one I did because I just really wanted the overalls. And if they went through all of this trouble, the pattern pieces are probably fine. This pattern is from 1970. This pattern is from 1976, and you can see like the envelope has really taken a beating. But I wanted to show you this one because it is size 1 toddler. And on a lot of vintage patterns, you do see sizes that don't necessarily match up with today's sizes. Size 1 would technically be a 12-month. I find sizing very interesting, and it is something that I deal with a lot on my Etsy. People want to know what size something is. If you have ever shopped for clothes, you know that a size 10 is not a size 10 at every place and in every brand. So I really recommend that you check the measurements on the back whenever you're using any kind of pattern, but specifically vintage patterns. And if you're interested in how we came to sizing in America in the first place, I'm going to put a link down in the show notes for a podcast called Butt Stuff. And it's about how we developed standardized sizing in clothes. So check it out. It's a good listen. All right, this pattern is from 1970. And you can already see it's a little different. First of all, it looks like the instructions and everything were typed out on a typewriter. So you've got your measurements here, and it opens from the side, which is different. Most of them open at the top. This one opens at the side, and the inside's a little different too. It's all white paper. You get all kinds of instructions, things to adjust the size, the neckline, all of these different styles that you can make. I love these old advertisements. It's something else that's great when you get vintage patterns. You never know what's going to be inside of them. And the pattern itself, so I, from my sewing days, associate patterns on tissue paper, but this one is on regular white paper, and you would use a tracing wheel to cut the pieces out of fabric. And that one's 1970. This one is from, I think, 1985, 1982, and it's another paper pattern. So you get the pattern on paper and you trace it out. And this is another one. And this one also came with something interesting, because one of the great things about vintage patterns is the little things that you find inside. Somebody's handwriting and how they had traced this out on paper already. So that's kind of cool. What is the... You can let me know down in the comments. Have you ever found anything interesting in a vintage pattern? All right. And then this pattern is most reminiscent of the ones that I remember hanging around my house when I was a kid. And this one's interesting because the directions are handwritten. I mean, it's a Xerox copy, but they're written, and you can see somebody drew the pictures. And then the pattern pieces themselves have handwriting on them. So that's kind of neat too. I haven't tried this pattern yet, but it's cute. And it even says it's cute. Doesn't catch mice, but sure is cute. And these are the different types of patterns that I have in my collection. And I also worked on my free pattern for November. This is the stuffed turkey. I showed it in my last video, but I made another one and added darts into it so that it could be stuffed kind of thick. And I got the pattern all drawn out and scanned. So hopefully sometime this week I'll have a chance to get that up with a tutorial. Until then, I'll see you next time. Bye!